Hey guys, Steve Simpson here with Central Florida Property Management. I hope you guys are doing well. A question we get asked often is whether or not a property can be sold with tenants in place in the state of Florida. And the short answer is yes. There's no provision against doing that in the law or anything else. But the longer answer is it really depends on who the end buyer of the property is likely to be. So let me explain. So in Florida, unless it's otherwise stated in a lease, leases transfer through sale. So if I own a property, it's leased out, I sell it to you, that lease moves with the property, even though I was the person who entered into the lease, and now I don't own the property anymore, and you still do. So basically, if you're buying the property, you're buying it subject to the lease. What impact does this have? Well, generally speaking, most people that want to buy properties to owner-occupy them, so to basically a normal home purchase where they're buying it to move them and their family into it. Most people like that do not want to buy a property that is occupied by a tenant. Now, there's some nuance there depending on when the tenant is expected to move out. So obviously, if it's only going to be a month or two, might not be a huge deal. But if there's 6, 8, 9 months left on the lease, most people wanting to buy a property to own or occupy it are not going to be okay with that. Furthermore, most buyers of owner-occupied properties get financing on the property. They get a mortgage. And most mortgage companies require that if you are getting financing specifically for an owner-occupied property, that you are able and that you do occupy that property within a certain time frame of when the sale closes. I think it's usually about 60 days. So they'll say something like, in the contract, hey, if you don't, we're giving you this loan, assuming you're going to live in the property. If you don't within 60 days, technically they could call the loan or, basically they have that in there because they want you moving into the property. And so what they're often going to do is if you're buying a property that has a lease on it, before closing, they're going to ask you for a copy of the lease on the property because they'll see in the deal that the property is tenant occupied. And if the lease extends past that 60-day mark after closing, they probably won't give you financing to begin with. So if you were a buyer who wanted to buy a tenant-occupied property, effectively you have to lie to your lender to make things kind of happen. So how does this translate into buying rental properties in Florida? The big, $20,000 question is, who is buying this property? If it's an owner-occupied property, we usually recommend, or if you think your buyer is going to be an owner-occupant, we usually recommend not listing the property for sale while a tenant's in place, unless and until that lease is coming out to terminate. So if you have a lease that's ending in, call it 2-3 months, sure, list the property for sale, and hopefully the way the timing kind of maps out, someone who wants to own or occupy the property will be able to do that. Now, there's other things to consider. If the tenants don't keep a very clean home, it might make more sense to wait and get the property vacant totally before you list the property for sale. But in terms of kind of making all the contractual stuff work, we usually recommend 2 to 3 months. On the other hand, if you think your end buyer is going to be an investor, then by all means, sell the property tenant occupied. Most investors would prefer that, assuming the property is in good condition and the renter is performing, meaning that they're taking care of the property, they're paying rent on time, all that sort of stuff. A key consideration kind of bringing that up is that most rental properties to a degree will be valued on the rental income they're producing. So we run into situations kind of often where we take over properties that have tenants in place, and a lot of times the rents are fairly below market rent, which is fine, not a huge deal unless you're selling the property. Why? Well, if I'm a investor buying the property and I'm paying the price I'm willing to pay to buy the property is dependent on how much money the property is generating. If the lease you have in place is significantly below market, it's a negative because if it were vacant, I could buy the property, put a tenant in at market rate, and I'm good to go. But if it was occupied, I have to wait till this lease that has below market rent expires, then do my turn, then get it on the market. So now, on the other hand, if the tenants were paying market rent, then great. Basically, the day I close, I'm already getting paid market rent. I mean, nothing's better than that, right? So to kind of look at it another way, If you're selling a property that you think primarily would sell to investors, just make sure everything is good to go in terms of your rental being at market rate, your tenants performing or at least appearing to perform. I don't mean like to do anything nefarious, but like, make sure to keep a clean home, maybe provide incentive to the tenants to make the property look like it's well cared for, stuff like that. On the other hand, if it's going to be an owner-occupant buying it, again, think about both the buyer's desired restrictions and then the financing restrictions on the purchase of that property when deciding, when you're going to list it, if you're going to list it, all that sort of stuff. So like many things in real estate, this is all just about planning and thinking ahead as to who your end user or in this case, buyer is going to be. Hopefully that all makes sense. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Hope you guys are doing great.